Um, I feel I should begin with an apology, though, because I spent really the best part of 3 years, certainly the last two intensively, sort of reading and researching and writing about a really nasty piece of work. And there is, on the face of it, very little good to be said in favour of General James Wilkinson. On the face of it, I emphasize. But what else can be said, you would say, for a man who combined a career as Commander-in-Chief of the United States Army, and that was how Congress designated him, Commander-in-Chief, with his second existence as Agent 13 in the Spanish Secret Service. For 11 years, he commanded the nation's forces, he garrisoned its forts, he patrolled its frontiers, and for most of that time, he also fed America's military secrets to the largest power in the hemisphere. And if Spain had acted a little more vigorously on the warnings that Agent 13 passed on, they would have captured the Lewis and Clark expedition and put a halt to their westward exploration. And they did heed his advice about fortifying the border with Texas, and so they kept the United States out of Texas for about a generation, thanks to his warnings. So he was a pretty effective agent, it has to be said. And then there is also his reputation as the man who founded the Spanish conspiracy, and the Spanish conspiracy was designed to split away Kentucky and Tennessee from the rest of the country. So a guy like that, you know, he really makes sort of snakes seem like a model of rectitude, and chameleons look good, sort of ideals of consistency compared with Wilkinson. And I simply refer to him as an artist in Treason. But in the words of Frederick Jackson Turner, he was the most consummate artist in Treason the nation has ever possessed. Roll over Bendict Arnold, here comes James Wilkinson. And I should also apologize because I really enjoyed writing about him. In my defense, there are two possible explanations I could offer. The first is there's something psychologically compelling about somebody who can lead a double life, absolutely in the glare of publicity, for so long. And the other, quite curiously, is that he played a role that was extraordinarily important to the survival of democracy in a very new and very vulnerable state. In short, I'm going to suggest that despite his despicable behavior, James Wilkinson did a lot for which we should be very grateful. Now, what's so surprising about his career as a spy is that almost everyone suspected him of being one. He must have been one of the most outed secret agents in history. Contemporaries habitually referred to him as Wilkinson, the Spanish pensioner, which meant that he was in the pay of Spain. And there were all sorts of pamphlets printed accusing him of being a traitor. And in Kentucky, there was an entire newspaper called the Western World, which was devoted to exposing him. And each of the first four presidents, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, together with their cabinet colleagues, were all aware of Wilkinson's uncomfortably close contacts with the Spanish authorities in New Orleans. And they discussed repeatedly what should be done with him. Now, the founding fathers were no fools, and so clearly there was something that Wilkinson did that was more important than the threat of his treachery. So there's not just the psychological puzzle of what made him do it. There's this historical mystery to be solved. Yes, there's this historical mystery. So I'm just going to give you a quick sort of outline of the first half of his life. He's born the son of a penniless Maryland tobacco grower. His father, Joseph Wilkinson, died when James was barely 8. The boy adored him, quotes him endlessly about how he should lead his life, takes him really as the model for the way that a Maryland gentleman planter should live his life. But it's pretty obvious that Joseph was a swindler. He borrowed from his friends, he never paid them back, he built up huge debts, and he died virtually bankrupt. In short, this is not really a very good model on which to build your life. After his father's death, he was brought up by a devoted, adoring grandmother who spoilt him hopelessly. And it was on her that he practiced his dominant talent. And that's his ability to charm people. Now, charm is a quality that history tends to ignore. You know, it dies when the person who practices it dies. But we know how important it is when we meet a charming person, how immediately you warm to them. And that's certainly the effect that he had on people. He was ebullient, he was vigorous, he was energetic. He had a prodigious memory. He talked superbly, mostly about himself, but the stories were very good. And he had a nice turn of phrase. There was one moment when Washington said, "I received yet another report about your being a Spanish pensioner." And Wilkinson said, "Oh, well, this is the sort of thing that happens in an era," and this is his quote, "when slander on stilts stalks over the fences of reputation." Now, that's a good phrase. And there's a nice tribute paid to him, really, on the eve of the Battle of Saratoga, when he was a 20-year-old adjutant general to General Horatio Gates. And it came from a militia colonel, and militia colonels really don't care for regular officers particularly. But this is what he said about young Wilkie. And that was what he was known as. You know, he was just this young, effervescent kid. And this is what the militia colonel said. He said, "Wilkie's conduct during that memorable campaign endeared him to me. He seemed to be the life and soul of the headquarters of the army. He, in the capacity of adjutant general, governed at headquarters." And this is the part of what he really contributed to, was the extraordinary victory at Saratoga when Gates's army trapped General John Burgoyne's army up against the banks of the Hudson River and forced their surrender. And Gates certainly felt that Wilkinson played a major role. This is not exact portraiture, as you can see behind me, but we're assuming that the guy holding the flag behind Gates is indeed Wilkinson, because he was so close to Gates, both professionally and personally. Gates used to refer to him as "my son. You are as a son to me," he wrote on several occasions. And when the news of the great victory was taken to Congress, it came with a strong recommendation, a certain absolute insistence that this kid of 20 should be made a general. And so he became the youngest American general in the army. So that's part of the power of his charm. I think the other part, again, of his personality, this is his wife, Nancy, more formally known as Anne Biddle. Now, I'm terribly sorry, it's just a little sort of miniature of a very good portrait by Charles Wilson Peele, but I can't find the original. But just sort of take a look at her, take a look at that sort of little mouth and those sort of bright eyes. She's a Quaker. Look at that hair piled on her head. That is no ordinary Quaker. She is delicate and sensitive. She writes beautifully, wonderfully funny comic letters, always actually requiring some little luxuries to be sent to her. And I think that when we come to the sort of motivation, one of the things is this golden couple. He charming, she delicate, civilized, flirtatious, and wanting a little luxury. He always insists she has a carriage, always insists she has the best clothes. He spends a great deal of money on it. She loves it. And they are a very, very charming couple. And so out on the frontier, this is even more valuable, because after all, the frontier is a place where there isn't much entertainment. So if you have a couple like this, they are very welcome, but they are very expensive. And so he has to borrow money. He borrows a lot of money. And the great thing is that out on the frontier, people, of course, are straight talkers, but they are very susceptible to charm. Charm is worth its weight in gold. One old-timer remembered in as late as the 1834, when Wilkinson came out and his neighbor had lent him something like $250 and hadn't been paid for a long time. He went round to see Wilkinson to demand his money back. And the old timer remembered that the neighbor came out after 20 minutes having lent him another $200. So it's not surprising, really, that his personality also played a part. And you remember that in 1787, he went to meet what turned out to be his Spanish handlers down in New Orleans. He took a flatboat of Kentucky produce down to New Orleans, And he met these two very experienced administrators, a man called Navarro and a man called Miro.